Regional School District Number 8 Board of Education regular meeting of Monday, May 16th. I'd like to begin with, call the meeting to order and begin with a roll call starting to my left. Please.
Harrison Pellerin, Heber.
Jack Kaplan, Marlboro.
Carol Shane, Marlboro.
Sue Rapley, Marlboro. Amy Mario Hebron.
Bruce Olmsted, Hebron. Richard Jacobson, Hebron.
Joe O'Connor, Hebron.
Danny Holtzclaw, Andover.
David Castanian, Andover.
Howard Fremont, Hebron. Al Sininsky, Superintendent of Schools.
Jamie Allen, the business manager.
Karen Capolita, board clerk.
We could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is in the back of the room. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That brings us up item number 3, which is public comments. Is there anyone that would like to address the board at this time? Hearing none, that'll bring us to item number 4, which is call for additions to the agenda. Are there any proposed additions or deletions? Changes? Okay, hearing none.
Excuse me. I have one, but we have a meeting tomorrow night for facilities, but I don't know if it belongs here, but I'd like to add, trying to recommend an extension for the Hebron Parks and Rec for their contract to, if you could add that and have some discussion on that for the Bruce Clarko's contract, which I think is a 3-year contract, right, Bob?
Bob?
I'm under the impression that it's continuing because it's money in the budget based on what he has said.
Right.
So
But do we need to sign off as a contract, like an
I
extension?
think the dollar amount is within the range that we've always approved, so that's why we didn't do anything with it.
Are you talking about signing a contract with Mr. Delarco and stuff?
No. The contract, I think when we entered the contract, it was a rolling, like the first year's gone by.
Right, he's already presented to us what the budget for next year.
Right, so that's the second year, we have a third year, but I think most of our contracts have been in the past, were in good faith, that since he's done a good job.
Before we do that, before we put her on discussion, let's make a motion and then we'll discuss it and decide whether or not we need it.
Great.
So you're making a motion to
I'd like to make a motion to
add to the agenda an item.
add to the agenda for Hebron Parks and Rec contract for IPM and turf management.
Discussion. Is there a second? Second by Amy. Any discussion? Okay, now's the time. So do we have a proposed contract? Or we are in the middle of a contract?
We're in the middle of the contract. I thought this is the second year, and we just go to the house. For 2 years. I'd have to go back in my records and check it, but I thought that if my memory serves me correctly, that we entered into a 2-year agreement. This is year 2. We entered into the already said that we need X number of dollars in the budget to continue that. So that was our initial plan. So as far as I'm concerned, it's continuing for next year and at a dollar amount they give us.
Is there any reason that we can't wait till June? Just to find out to get those answers? Is there
No,
something pressing
no,
that they're going to stop serving?
No, there's not. I just thought it would be in his good faith, and he's done a very good job, I think, but I wish we'd had this conversation yesterday in our facilities meeting, but, so I can table it.
We can table all that, try it and bring it back, and because we probably need a proposal from him anyway, or a proposed addendum or something.
Jamie, I believe he makes the proposal, we made the proposal to Andy saying, what he's proposing, and we just took it to the number that he said he needed.
Can we just find out for the next meeting if we need to do an action to extend it, and we'll just put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
Okay, that's good, that's good. Thank you.
Just taking a note here, sorry. Okay, that brings us to any other proposed additions or changes to the agenda?
I wanted to ask, to add superintendent's evaluation process to the agenda
superintendent's review. What was the name of the review process?
Yeah.
To the, for discussion. Second by Rich, or Rich. Any discussion, Amy?
Well, I was thinking that, we put aside last year, because I know we're in the midst of it, but looking towards this year to be on track for, a July appraisal time. Thinking now's the time we should begin that process, and I was wondering, or wanted to ask if you wanted to delegate that to somebody to begin the process, or whether you want to do it, or just, I kind of wanted to just throw it on the table so that we can.
I agree with the motion, because I know we all talked about, if there was one thing, is reforming that process and the document itself.
And now I'm talking about like the starting.
Starting time, completion time, and I think also the form itself needs to be reviewed. So why don't we put that as, any other discussion or opposition to that?
I definitely feel the form needs to be written.
Right, okay.
Agree with that.
Any objection to adding item 8.10, which would be discussion and possible action regarding the planning for the superintendent's or planning and process for the superintendent's performance review procedure? I guess we'll perfect that when it comes out. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Okay. That will be item 8.10. Any other proposed changes? Hearing none, I'll move on to item 5, report of the administration. Item 5.1, adoption of the 16-17 budget.
With the approval of the budget at referendum, the board has traditionally passed a motion to accept the budget, and I've asked for that to be one of the action items this evening. And this is we proposed the budget, it's been approved, now the board needs to finally ratify it and accept it for the 16-17 academic year.
Make a motion.
It's actually under an action item. It's under the item 8.6. Any question? Well, we can discuss it when we come up with a motion. 5.2, Bob, the levy payment schedule.
What we've done is we've developed a levy payment schedule that's based on the budget and follow a format that's similar to what was adopted in previous years. We would ask that levy schedule be approved and then forwarded to the towns.
5.3, awarding of the cafeteria bid.
Yeah, we went out to bid. As you would recall, the State Department of Education required that we go out to bid for food service. Special specifications and proposals were prepared, and the proposals were available April 4th. We opened the bids on May 6, 2016. There were 2 bidders at the pre-bid conference. Only one bidder decided to submit a proposal, and that was Chartwell's, our current contractor. Based on policy 3330, it would be my recommendation to award the contract to Chartwell's in 5 one-year contracts.
Thank you, Bob. That's under, for action, discussion and action under item 8.8. 5.4, acceptance of the 2014-15 audit.
The auditor was present at the last meeting. If you would recall, there was a surplus of approximately $13,000 that the auditor identified as being able to be returned to the towns. So it would be my recommendation to accept the audit and return the surplus to the towns in a proportion to which the towns in that year gave the money to the board.
You've been through this the past couple of years. I'm wondering why the only option provided was just the return to the towns.
Whatever, that's my recommendation. If you choose to put it into a non-recurring capital fund, that's a prerogative of the board.
Would you?
It's under 8.9, yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, thanks, Rich. 5.5, the high school update.
Okay, There have been some questions about vaping and drugs at the high school, so what I've done is I've asked Mr. Leslie to prepare a group presentation on that particular topic, so if we could take a moment, and Mr. Leslie?
Do you want me to add it on to my one that I'm going to be giving in a few minutes?
It's up to the
Well,
board.
we have Mr. Leslie and Dr. Cerruti scheduled for under presentations on 6.1 and 6.2, which I believe was largely in response to the requests that I received from fellow board members and
That's
people in
correct.
the community about just what we're doing internally and where we are with drug prevention and so forth. So that's the intent of 6.1 and 6.2. So I'll let you, what do you feel comfortable with, Scott? Are you
I've tagged it on to the presentation I'm doing, so that's okay. That way,
Okay,
fewer stops and starts.
that's fine. Okay, 5.6, update on the net between baseball field and tennis court.
Okay, on May 3rd, BSC, Paul Steiner, Scott, Mark Logan, Rich Colaco, Mr. Rossi from BSC and I met to discuss the issues surrounding the net on the baseball field. What the conclusion of the meeting was, there would be additional fencing needed, so that what he was going to do is to go to a contractor with to a vendor that had a state contract to see if he could negotiate a price that would be cheaper to get the whole project done. The contractor on the 11th called him back and said he was not willing to take the job. So that Mr. Z and I have been going back and forth, and what the result is that Eagle Fence, the apparent bidder on the project, will be getting back to him with a quote to install the additional fencing. He had hoped to get it this afternoon, but probably tomorrow he'll have it from them.
I don't understand what you just said about the bid being
What
rejected.
had happened is that we had met, because remember the discussion that the board had relative to safety
Mhm.
of the net and of the poles that would support the net.
Mhm.
So at the result of the discussion with Mr. Colaco and the other people I had mentioned
Mhm.
was that we should put the posts in the ground to hold up the net, and then put in another fence, so that there essentially would be two fences in the outfield. And he hadn't received a price on that additional fencing as of yet. And before we go and do anything, I need the pricing on the additional fencing.
But I think the question was about the bid and why was the rejected bid, or whoever was, the RFPs, there was very little.
No, the bid was not rejected. It was just looking for another way to address the issue, using a different vendor. Hopefully, the idea was to contact a smaller vendor to see if he could do the job cheaper. And the people said, no, we don't want to do the job, so that we need to go back to Eagle Fence, the original bidder, and he'll be providing us with the cost to put up the fencing.
I think another question that I had was, I forgot.
Is it?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay, Bob, that brings us up to finance, Jamie.
Did you have an update on the ADA and the stairs?
The ADA, I've cleared the hurdle with all the hurdles with the Department of Ed. What we need to do now is to sit down and interview the people who've quoted on the work and decide who's going to get the design contract. Once that design contract is completed, once the design contract is awarded, then we meet with the Department of Education to be sure the vendor understands all the Department of Education regulations, so that we can go forward with the construction project. As far as the stairs go, I've had a conversation with the attorney this afternoon. I'd rather discuss that in executive session.
On the,
Oh, no, we're still talking about ADA, or are you switching?
no, I was going back to ADA.
Oh,
You go ahead.
well, there are some things that don't actually have to be built that were part of that, like the risers for the music department.
Yeah, I'm talking about the construction. I'm sorry?
Can those just be purchased?
Yes, because those were part of the budget.
Right.
So where I'm going now is that we need to we had two vendors, BSC and Beta, that submitted proposals on to do the architectural drawings and bid specifications, et cetera. Once we decide who the contractor is, I need to set up a meeting with the school, with DAS. DAS will give I just want to be sure there aren't any questions about the specifications, what should be included in them, how change orders should be prepared, how change orders should be approved. So I want to just be sure that everybody's on the same page, and then we can move forward. So,
Has the state approved the money?
yes. See, we're in the queue for the grant. The idea is to, as part of that, all the submissions, it was interesting. The state had misplaced my submission of February 5th, so we finally got that squared away. So once we took care of that, they reviewed all the data that I had presented, and they gave me the go-ahead to set up interviews with the prospective engineers, or designers, whatever you want to call them, and then pick one, set up a meeting with DAS. DAS will just give them the usual briefing, because some of their procedures have changed because there's some new people there now. And then once that's done, they'll design the project and go to bid.
So the committee needs to get together and decide.
That's right.
I mean, on this, on design.
Syllabus?
It's the facility committee is part of the specially assigned committee, so we had to form by resolution the committee to respond to the statute. So it's a statutorily required committee that addresses all the building issues. So the board will not be voting on contracts and so forth. The committee will be approving those contracts. Bob, the one question I had was one of the questions was whether or not the risers would be included in the ADA project, and there was never any finalization on that.
I think that's going to be part of the discussion we have when we go.
So there's still a possibility that these risers could be included under
It
that
could
grant?
be.
Okay. All right.
But regardless, if they deny it, remember, money was appropriated within the budget to purchase the risers.
I understand that, but I don't want to use it as a fallback to the
No,
urgency of the
absolutely,
need,
no.
because it's an ADA compliance issue. Doesn't some of these issues affect the bleachers? Wasn't there something?
There's entrance to the bleachers.
Entrance to the bleachers, so access, this is, I mean, it's not a bleacher, but it is actually used by the students, so I think to not include it, I think, would be a farce, but I'm sure they probably have some reasons if they do, but I don't think we should relax from that and push it under the grant.
Have you had a conversation with our friends that wrote our compliance letter?
I'm sorry?
Have you had a conversation with our friends that wrote the auto compliance letter?
I've had a conversation, those people, as I understand it, are in the same bureau, and they've seen all the application and the fact that we're moving forward on it. We've complied with everything they've requested. They asked for a certification of the votes of the amount of money that was appropriated by the board. They've asked for the certification of the votes of the board that the board made to create a building committee.
This is the agency that cited us, or
Yes.
the agency that's managing the grant?
They're both related.
In the timeframe next summer then, for the work?
What I'd like to do is get the stuff done as quickly as possible. So I think that once we sit with the contractor, or the engineer, we'll be able to finalize that.
Any other questions for Bob?
I'm a little bit confused on what you're asking is the risers. I mean, I heard that the money was approved, but then the riser is.
There was a question in the materials that Bob had asked the person that he first met with, of whether or not the risers could be included in this grant, because it's not necessary, because it's movable, right? It's not a built structure, it's not permanent, so it's not a fixed asset, or it's not a permanent structure, so therefore it's considered equipment. So,
And I've asked the question, I've gotten two different answers, which is,
and so that's why we budgeted for it. We're still asking for it to be included in the grant, so it could be if they're approved, but if not, but we have to do it, so.
Right, so I heard that the grant has been approved,
yes,
but it does not have the risers in it.
no, we have a sum to address the handicap issues. The grant, if you recall from the initial submission, the construction was estimated to be somewhere around 175 to 200,000. That did not include the risers. I've had discussion with them that, you know, could possibility be there, including the risers, and they said, well, when you get your things finalized, we'll come in and talk about it.
But we're talking about another year before this stuff gets kicked off.
Well, no, I don't think
It's not
so.
another year. You're going to be meeting so next
Summer.
Realistically, it's not a year.
before you get started, but meeting with the committee.
The meeting will be as soon as the architect is picked, the engineer is picked.
No, so if we don't get to start implementing it for a year, that means there's another year that goes by without
No,
something like that.
that's it. I would disagree with you, because once we get there, yes or no,
Ah,
we can go forward and figure out which course of action is best for us.
Yeah, my specific question is, I just want to make sure we're all clear, because I'm still not clear.
hmm.
You put in a $175,000 grant, correct?
Yeah.
Or whatever the number was.
I
Did
told you
not
that was the
include
original estimate from an architect that was constructed, I think, in probably 2011, 2012. I'm not sure of the exact year. I've got the book back in the office.
So we put that number, I think I didn't remember what we put in for, but whether or not I don't remember the risers, but for this specific, my specific question is, you got how much money approved?
They just said we would have enough money to address the handicapped accessibility. They didn't put the total dollar amount on it yet.
Okay. And that, the risers are not in that portion as of,
The risers were not in the facility the site modifications. The risers were separate. The idea was to ask the state if they could be included in that project as a way of getting, of securing additional state funding for the project, and really being able to reallocate that money toward a different purpose.
So that number that we put in for, I thought it was the one that we took out of the engineering study. BSC.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
The number that we put in, I thought came out of the BSC study.
No, the handicapped accessibility came from the Lawrence study, because those identified the specific projects. And then I submitted the Lawrence study because they addressed the issues specifically, and were in response to the questions asked by Mr. Wood when he made his site visit.
Now that's different than what we discussed.
Well, see, don't forget, the BSC study was much more encompassing. The ADA specifically dealt with access to the athletic complex. It had nothing to do with walkways, sidewalks, or anything. This was specifically to address the handicapped accessibility to the site.
Right, so the dollar number we came up with came out of the BSC group.
The notion of approving remediating the handicapped accessibility is going to be dependent on when we take those specifics that were identified, what's that going to cost in today's dollars?
Once you pick a design professional is going to put bid specs together, and you're going to get bids in for contractors, that's going to give you the scope and price of your project.
I understand, but when we sat down before writing this request,
Right.
we took the numbers out of the BSC group for the stuff that fulfilled the requirement of the previous document. And it included engineering costs and the risers cost. That's what I thought we submitted for. But we know that other document is really old, so we didn't want to use those numbers. So now I'm hearing
I am
come back.
using that number. What I'm saying is your
Well, it
grant's
sounds
not,
like he said
your
he
grant's
is.
not going to be based on that number. It's not going to be based on BSC's number. That grant's going to be based on once you get the bid specifications and you get the price. So they have an estimate of roughly where their project's going to be.
And that's the only thing, they want to see what the specifications are, how we're going to remediate the difficulties, and do they agree with the ultimate solution that the engineer proposes, or will they see a cheaper way of doing it?
So this task force is going to be going on this?
That's why I sent Mr. Olmsted the copies of the specifications, and what I plan to do as soon as the meeting is scheduled, to call the people in. We had discussed briefly that they would come in and make a presentation for approximately 20 minutes, and then the other few minutes would be questions. The board would, the committee would interview them one night, and then vote as to who was going to get the contract, and then once we got that contract, I'm off to the State Department with it.
Have you received my comments to the certificate?
No, I haven't seen your comments yet.
Because I sent them about 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry?
I sent them several weeks ago.
Okay, let me, she didn't mention they had come in, so.
Who's on?
It's the facilities committee, and it's led by Bruce.
Oh. Very good.
Just the entire facilities committee, Bruce.
And Bruce is the chair.
Finance change, 5.7.
In your packet shows a projected balance at this time, as of April 30th, of $259,000. We did, as I mentioned in the memo, we did an extensive review of open purchase orders. And in addition, we set a deadline with the department chairs and administrators that they need to review their open POs and close them or adjust them as necessary as of last Friday, the 13th. At this stage of the game, the only POs that will be allowed to put in the system are if it's an emergency or a repair or maintenance. And the biggest expense that we have moving forward now are the teacher payrolls. The teachers, part of the contract, were paid during the summer. And in the past, we couldn't really close out the books prior before I was getting here because the payrolls were actually being done 2 in July, 2 in August. We've changed that where we're going to be able to generate those payrolls in June so that we have a better handle on the numbers, and then we just hold those payrolls until it's time to distribute them to the teachers. At least this way, we'll be able to have a better idea of the expenses and the taxes and that type of thing that go along with those costs.
Can I ask a question on that? How many teachers are opting to get paid through the summer?
I would say probably most of them. I don't know off the top of my head, but most teachers take what is called the 26 pays as opposed to 21.
Is that a contractual obligation, Bob?
Yes,
Or
it is.
It is?
So
So you
you
have
can select
as an option?
21, 26.
Okay.
Is that the only group that has that option?
Right.
Yes, because as you would recall with the nurses, we made that 21. The non-certified employees get paid because most of them are the ones that work 52 weeks, wouldn't have that option.
So can we try next time around to?
That's one of the things we've mentioned.
As far as revenues go, we seem to be up to date on most of them. Of course, my mantra was still waiting for the excess cost of agency placement grant, but as you can see in my report in attachment 2 on the second page, I still have the number that we anticipate getting from the state, so it's offsetting the numbers now. And we're still anticipating some tuitions, and I set aside money for items that have invoices without purchase orders or emergency purchase orders. So those numbers could change.
If I could go back to the budget item, I forgot to give the board some information. What's happened to the state budget has been a discussion for most of the weekend and for the past couple of weeks. What we did is we took what we thought to be the final numbers. These numbers come from CCM, the Commission on Municipalities, and what we tried to do was to determine what the levies would be, the change in levies to each of the towns in ECS. So what I've done is I prepared a just kind of a brief summary so you can get an idea of what that number looks like. And what we've done is then we apply the percentage of the levy to it. So you can see the reductions that
Is this
the,
for the current fiscal year or
I'm
next
sorry,
year?
that's for next year. I think that there are a couple other things that, enough copies?
No, we need more.
So-
Want to hold our questions until we get to that section later on?
Under which one?
Under where we approve the budget, status reports.
Oh, under discussion, under budgets, under acceptance, adoption,
Yes.
yeah, if you can, if you don't mind. Unless it's a specific question she's up to right now.
It's a bunch of questions, so.
Bob, can you, I'm trying to understand this because you.
What we did is based on the reduction in ECS funds to each of the towns. What I did is I went to the report from CCM, found out what that number was, applied the levy percentage, that the percentage of the budget that's applied to, that each town is responsible for, then applied that to the reduction in ECS. For example, Andover's reduction in ECS was 31,000, 14.48% of that is about $4,000.
So let me ask you a question for that, because when you say Andover's allocation for ECS, is that Andover's and Hebron and Marlboro's allocation just for Rham, is what I'm asking?
No.
Not
The far right column is just for Rham.
So that's my question, why would a $31,000 reduction to Andover's ECS funding, are you assuming that Rham is 14.48% of Andover's education budget?
No, but if you look at it, Rham is, if you look at the Andover education budget, I'm sorry, you're right, 14.48% of that is Rham's portion. That covers the cost of the students from.
I understand. Just hear me out for a second why I'm confused with this. If there's a reduction of $31,193 to Andover's ECS funding,
Mhm.
is that $31,000 for all Andover Elementary and Rham?
Yes.
Or is that
That's right.
$31,000 of ECS funding to Andover that's being reduced just for Rham?
No, that's Andover's total reduction.
So you formulated that we are, let's say, Rham's cost to Andover is 14.48% of their entire budget for education.
Oh, Andover is responsible for 14.48% of the Rham budget.
It is when it's spread with Andover and Marlboro. Right? We're about 14% of the budget, Marlboro's and Hebron's over 54%, and Marlboro makes up the difference, just about 31, it's almost the same exact number.
Yeah,
That's
that's,
what it's
That's what
saying,
it is.
that's the numbers.
Okay, but understand what I'm saying, I just want to make sure I understand this form, because the way I'm reading, am I missing something here? Because if I'm looking at your form, it says Andover's reduction in ECS funding is $31,193. Is that their entire ECS funding reduction for Andover, regardless of what school it is?
That's right.
So,
Yes.
so why would a 14.48% allocation of that be considered right?
Because if you look at the levy payments schedule as part of it,
Right.
Andover is responsible for 14.48% of Rand's budget.
I got that. Okay, we'll talk about it
I
offline. You know what I'm
agree with
saying?
all that.
My
Yeah,
guess is
they're
that
not-
the total Rams portion that they're losing in ECS funds is 47,400. He's got columns in here that don't
Right,
affect each other.
Perhaps, and so my question is the reduction in ECS funding to the three towns 47,400?
No, it's about 122,000.
Okay.
Okay, great. We'll have to talk about this. Okay, I'm not understanding. I'm sorry. I
well,
just
I
don't
don't
understand.
understand it either, I think now is the time to have
Okay.
the conversation.
Yeah, go ahead,
I'm
ask
not
your
clear
questions.
either. So, go ahead, 'cause I was following you.
Yeah, so I don't want to get the chalkboard.
One right
It's
behind
a
you.
hundred and twenty-two thousand.
How is the ECS calculated at the state?
The hundred and twenty-two thousand shortfall is for
All three towns.
all three towns, all three schools.
That's right.
But, so the question that I said before was that Rham's, the reduction that's attributed to Ram is 47.4, correct? The amount of the shortfall that's attributed to Ram for all three towns is 47,400.
That's right.
Right. You get that?
No.
I understand that's what they did, but I don't see how you can do that. Because
So Bob, if you look at the total in column 1, you say you have total, you got Andover at
It's
31.
122,810.
Right,
That's the
exactly.
grand total.
That's the grand total. So that's the grand total in ECS reduction, reductions in ECS funding for the 3 towns combined.
Based on what we
Okay,
received
so
today.
my question is that reduction inclusive of the elementary schools and ramp across the board?
Yes, it is.
Just the pound reduction, okay. What I don't know, and I don't know how you got there, is how is RAM 14.48% of Andover's education budget? That's my question, because I know we are as part of the town levies, right? So that if it's 122 reduction for all 3, I don't know if these ratios here are correct.
What I did is I based it on the levy,
I know.
the way the budget is broken down for towns. And that's what has been done in the past. That's my only reason for showing this to the board. To understand that there was a reduction in ECS to the 3 towns of $122,000. If you apply the levy percentages to that, it comes out to $47,400. And that's the sole purpose there.
Right. Okay.
So is this document you received today final?
I received, this is the receipt, the document I received from the Commission on Municipalities. They took each town, what we could anticipate is a reduction in ECS. That's where these numbers come from.
how did they compare to last week's numbers?
The numbers have been changing weekly, daily, depending on, because if you look at one sheet I got in the one that was sent to me today is being the correct sheet. If you look at, let me just use Andover for an example. The Andover reduction was supposed to be, according to this sheet, that was sent to me this morning, was $22,196. So the numbers have been all over the lot.
The day we went out for a vote,
I'm sorry?
the day we went out for our approval for our budget, these numbers are lower, right, from a reduction point of view?
Yeah, they were, because remember, if you look at the governance cuts of ECS were more draconian than the legislature, because remember the legislature said that we would be, that they were not going to support large reductions in local aid.
Right.
And so the numbers that I gave you this evening is a result of that.
So they even went past their budget using those bigger numbers and ate the ECS decrease right in their budget calculations.
In a brief conversation with the town manager today, that, in fact, he said that the mill rate will probably drop even lower than he had thought.
And
So it just in layman's terms here, so we all understand, so the $47,400, based on your calculation of all 3 towns, your state, this number reflects that we're gonna be short $47,400?
No,
The towns are getting that less,
the towns would be getting that less that's attributable to
so
them.
the towns will pick up the difference.
really, these calculations are all relevant, because you have to figure out how the ECS is calculated, which portion of RAM from each town is that. And it would get much more complicated than Then you apply this formula.
It's just one way of looking at it. I understand that. And the ECS formula is so complex and one that's been manipulated in many times and in many ways.
So when you add the 12210 to the 72,000, you're looking at almost $200,000 reduction. Last year.
It's about 120,000.
Sorry?
About 120,000.
No.
47.
The 72,000 is in Rand's budget.
Transportation.
It's in the budget, so
Right,
that's,
but is that a reduction that we're gonna see?
there's a reduction.
So that's a
See, we use that as a
$72,000
budget
reduction.
offset. It's not going to be there.
So then it's a cut of almost 200, like.
It's a $200,000 reduction overall in grant funding.
22 plus the 72.
There's an overall reduction of about
This,
200,000.
the 72 is the more critical one.
Because that one hits us 100%.
Right.
The other one technically doesn't hit us.
We don't get ACS.
We don't, but the
It
towns
is
do.
the towns.
The towns do. That's why I want to make sure that,
But 72 hits us directly, and these other ones I'm even more concerned with, that don't have a number to them.
Right.
And I
They
think
don't
that
know
there are
the
two
access
others
costs.
that concern me greatly. One is I haven't seen any numbers on the increase in magnet school tuitions, and I've heard some preliminary numbers that it's going to go up somewhere between 15 and 25%, but nobody said anything at this particular juncture. And
What's our budget right now for next?
265. So we calculated that to be about $50,000, thereabouts, plus minus.
If Rham doesn't get ECS funds, then how can you say that there's a portion that's allocated to Rham?
It was just a way of looking at it.
No.
What it is the towns are going to have to pick up a larger load
Yeah.
of education expense because of the state's cuts. And so what Bob's trying to do is trying to get an idea of what that impact is just to Rham, so that everyone here has an understanding of what that net impact is for Rham.
And so, no update on the excess costs formula?
The excess cost, remember, excess cost has been cut, and excess cost is a function of the number of people, the number of students who are put in the pool for reimbursement, the amount of money that's being reimbursed. So that's a number that's will probably be, that we'll see sometime in the spring, a year from now. We don't know what that is because, I can't tell you, I can tell you what some of the special education placements are, but I can't tell you if they'll be there all year. I can't tell you if there'll be any new special education placements. Remember,
We decreased our percentage of excess costs that we're getting back. Was that sufficient from what the state's cutting?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
We get a percentage from the state of our excess costs,
That's right.
and we decreased what we expected in our budget.
We put in 70%.
Right. Rather than the 75.
Yeah.
It's been what the state recommended at the time.
Does that seem like it's in line with?
They don't have any answers for us. They're saying whatever we go, you go with that.
It's a function of the number of kids who come into who are eligible for excess, to be reimbursed for excess costs, and how many kids statewide are in that pool to divide the money up. So it's something that we really don't have any control over.
This 72.8, is that just Rham's cut in transportation, or is
That's
that?
just Rand's cut
So
transportation.
that does, but the three towns are also
Also
being
seeing
cut.
the same.
They have their own
Their own
transportation
cuts.
budget.
Significant.
So for later in discussion, we're gonna be approving a budget. Should we be approving a budget for how do we address the 122,040?
We're going to have to make some decisions along the way when these things start clearing, up, we're going to have to adjust expenditures and
See,
and
this
use
is,
discretion, and maybe some things that
Did we put numbers?
don't get done, something, whatever, we'll have to prioritize if it gets that urgent, so to maybe we have shortfalls or projected shortfalls, we're going to have to.
we haven't had a
Put
chance to
assumptions
process
in
all this
place?
information because it's so fresh.
Did we put assumptions in place, knowing that we were going to receive cuts from the state in funding?
We did, that's why we we reduced the amount of excess cost
Right.
that we budgeted. That was
How do
one.
our estimates compare to what we're seeing now?
Well, the The excess cost, I don't know, because as I said, it's a function of who applies for the reimbursement and how many children are involved.
It may be confusing because it says ECS, which people think is excess cost, is that, and then excess cost is your excess cost of agency placement grant. That's what the real title is of that grant.
Which is separate.
But we just shorten it and say excess cost, but
And that's
Did we
special
account
ed.
for the cut in transportation funding in our budget? We did not. Okay.
So,
we didn't know
for
about that.
instance,
Yeah, only about
in the agency placements or in that category, we're responsible for what, the first?
4.5%.
4.5%.
4.5 times.
Is that projected to change?
No, everybody's been trying to get that to change, but that number's been.
And that's what I'm saying, are you anticipating that ratio, because you would have planned at that number?
Correct.
Okay.
Basically, the way they develop the budget, and stuff, is, you know, they base it on the known 4.5 times, whatever the max is, depending on the student. And then, when they're developing the budget, I have them post it and say, what do you think? And they say, it's 7%.
So
So
the real
then we
unknown,
base it.
so the real unknown at this point, in addition to the others you mentioned, the magnet school tuition, is the one that you really don't know yet.
That's right. I got one, I received a letter from Rham this morning. We have some students at Rham. And if I look at their tuition, just quickly looking at their tuition, it's up $500 per student. That's another $3,000 that would be added to the magnet school tuition.
And just so
But I don't- I
you can't
don't have-
reduce that on the budget. They get it one way or the other. Any other discussion on that?
No, I just wanted to make you aware of those numbers and understand that any capital monies have not been approved. The governor has a bill that relates to criminal justice, and as soon as that, it will all be passed at one time, as I understand it. I haven't heard anything more than that.
With regards to magnet school tuition, you know, I'm sure we're not the only school districts in this situation. So when we start looking at these rising costs, and we have our cost of, let's say, our cost per pupil is 14,000, and the magnet school is 20,000. You know, it's starting to get, you know, we've all read the papers, we all know what our towns are saying. There has to be some way that, you know, at the end, it's going to choke itself. This is really going to choke itself.
And when you look at it, it's interesting to look at because we, by Department of Education regulation, we have to put ads on our website that allow connections to the magnet school. We have to bring the magnet school folks in here to make a presentation to our students. One of the things that we've been trying to do, and if you recall, that's why we put the STEM programming in place, so that we could attempt to reduce the number of kids that were going out of district. And it's a never-ending discussion.
So maybe what we should do is request to go and be heard at the budget hearings for the magnet schools, right? Doesn't happen.
And one of the things about the
Doesn't
magnet
happen.
school,
It does not happen, right? Our towns go through, in this entire state, through extraordinary leaps and bounds to review and approve budgets for towns. And these magnet schools just keep coming through with their budgets and giving us whatever it is, and no one ever knows where they are and how they're managing it. And I told you, for that school that I see on Route 2 all the time, the lights are on 24 hours a day, even at night, they don't shut them off. Why? Because we're paying.
it's a big difference. And then,
But my point here is, you know, I don't know the law, but at some point, like I said, this is going to choke itself. And I'm not, you know, I asked this question a couple years ago. How do they calculate their rates? And just if the taxpayers are paying, you know, if our cost per pupil is 14,000 and theirs is $20,000, the taxpayers have to pick up the extra 6, right? So when can we? I've seen other districts start making processes for other arguments for we're not enough. So where do we? When can we start doing that? And we say, look, if you're I guess this is my opinion, if I want to send my kid to a private school, say he's Catholic, I gotta flip the full bill for it. And if we're gonna have kids going to magnet schools and we're providing an education right here, and I know some of the kids, we've taken your recommendations and we've implemented the STEM programs and all this stuff, but we still have kids going to, you know, Crack down in Hartford and all these other places. When are we gonna have an open discussion about, if you wanna send your child there, here's your 14,000 that we can give you here in Rham, and let them start paying for the additional. We gotta have started.
I'll give you an example because you sound like my broken record. Because about 16, maybe 12 years ago, when one of the first invoices came from the state to Andover, we as a board voted to not authorize the district to pay the tuition costs for the magnet school tuition. And about a month later, we got a letter from the state that said, okay, thank you, we just reduced your town's ECS down to the same
Comes
amount.
out of ECS.
So there's your option. I mean, that's the way they manage it. I don't know, I don't know if there's a way to get beyond this, and like you said, it's gonna be one of these things that's gonna get to the point that there's going to be a general reaction, because no one knows what they're doing with the budget. It's kind of
Can't sustain this.
And I would say this, that there was an appeal, these are not the chef magnets. The chef magnets went to court to try to reduce the funding that goes to chef. And the plaintiffs in the chef case said, no, we're not reducing the funding. So that's, further exacerbates that whole thing. Then if you look at it further, it's really unfair to the districts because we'll say a student is on a waiting list, they don't have to tell us. If that student goes into the magnet in January, so be it, we need to pay the tuition, even though we didn't know about it.
Do we have a report for the magnet school tuitions that we pay?
I do.
We have it every.
Oh, that's a special ed one.
No, I can give you that
Magnet
school
school
tuition.
tuition.
I can't give you the list I've got now because I've got kids' names on it, but I can run it without the names.
Did we take it out? We used to have it. It was a tuition report, right?
No, it's just special ed.
No, I thought we had a
No.
tuition report by school.
That's
I
special
think
ed.
there's one in the budget, but I'm not sure.
We used to have it.
Yeah, we do have, yeah.
There was one used to say by school, how much we paid in tuition for each one. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong.
Can I want to suggest that we consider surveying the kids who are leaving, because the assumption is that they want to go get something else, when it might be just, they're just not happy here, and I guess, I think that surveying the kids after they leave, before they leave, when they give us notice that they are leaving, like, I think that would be worthwhile to survey the parents and the kids.
And I'll add to that, I think maybe when we have our retreat, when we have the representatives from Cape, maybe they can give us all some sort of brief and understanding on the magnet school situation, and what we can and cannot do as citizens and as an individual board in addressing some of these issues.
And just to follow up on what Mrs. Mario said, Mrs. Fearon had tried to do a survey of people who have left. And Lauren, could you kind of just bring us up to speed with?
We actually did two, did an email survey that was sent around to all of the email addresses that we had for parents who had their kids going to magnet schools. I think we had a total of, over a period of several years, about 60, 70 names, and got about 10 responses, which were varied. There were very little to draw in the way of overall conclusions, very individualized responses from them. And then a member of our department leadership team, Jen Stowiak, did an additional survey just about 6 weeks ago, where she called all of those numbers and the people who would speak to her. Not everybody did, and she left some messages. And again, had a variety of responses that ranged from because I felt my child that this was too big a school, or there had been some discomfort with atmosphere for the particular kid. There was very little in the way of discussion of overall programming, although some people talked about that. And in both of those, there were one or two people who answered who had sent their kid back to Rham and spoke about how sorry they were that they had ever gone somewhere else, sort of seduced by the bright shininess of it, and then realized the education here was better. But we had the same idea you did. Let's take a look, let's see if we can't draw some conclusions from it. And the responses we've had, at least so far, are that it's very individualized, personal decisions. We actually asked in the email one if we offered different programming, would that have changed your mind? And the responses from the very few people who got back to us was, that's not what it was about.
So, Maureen, let me ask you a question. Is it possible with all the comparisons we do with student performance, I hate to go back to,
Sure.
the testing and everything else, and if there's so many statistics with AP testing, scores, SATs, ACTs, and so forth, is there a way to compare our students at Rham to the performance of those students in those schools? Is there a way to do something? And, kind of thinking along the line, remember those, my Shih Tzu smarter than your honor student kind of bumper stickers? But I mean, do we have to start doing a communications campaign publicly outside of the school district? And if it comes to it, my Rham student is smarter than your
Well, those figures are available.
I hate to say it performs, but I don't want to say smarter, but is there some kind of communication message that we can put out that so these people who are thinking that the grass is greener on the other side might be able to see that 70 times out of, 7 out of 10 times they're wrong?
Well, but certainly the overall numbers are already available for the the SAT results from each school and the number of students who go on to colleges. There isn't, at least at the moment, a way for us to say that this is what the students at this magnet school who came from Rham, how they performed rather than the general, how the magnet performs. I will say that in response to having to allow magnet schools to do a showcase here, we've produced our own showcase of why they should stay. The AV, Paul Bancroft and our wonderful video production team put together a lovely movie that was showed to all of the 8th graders about all the reasons why the high school they should choose was Rham, and that was shown at the same time as the various magnet schools were presenting, and we had a very positive response from the kids about things that they hadn't realized.
Well, I will respectfully request through the superintendent that you arm us with as much communication material, because I will write the letters to the papers to brag about our student performance compared to other students. I just need that comparison information. At some point, we have to show stem this tide and to go in a different direction. And maybe arming Bob with some more, statistical information when they're here marketing for their schools. Maybe we run that video and show those statistics and put them on big banners and put them on the door as their parents are leaving, saying, please don't make this mistake. It could be the biggest mistake of your child's life. And I'm being real, because we have no say-so in this game. Parents have a say-so as to what happens here. I'm sure there's some protocol that they can go through magnet schools for addressing issues for their students, but this board doesn't have any opportunity to do that, and our towns are picking up a lion's share of the cost, right?
That's why, that was the genesis of the video that we asked the students in the video production program to
So
do.
let's see that. Let's see, can you, maybe at another board meeting, that can be presented for the board, I'd like to see that video. And let's work on some numbers for
And not only
communications
that,
campaign.
I think that Mr.
Communications
Leslie
committee to formulate that.
had a book created.
I think it should be on banners. I think instead of saying we're the 115th best school in the world, whatever, according to the Newsweek magazine, I'd rather put a Rham banner that says something that's very, very demonstrative to people who are making this leap.
I'm assuming it's on the website already, yes? That video? If it's not, it should be.
I don't know if it's on it or not, certainly.
Yeah.
It's on
One of the
YouTube.
other things that we
It's on
did, we
YouTube.
sent a
Yeah.
book-
It's up on YouTube apparently, so.
Okay.
We sent a book to each of the incoming 8th graders, Scott.
We did both the 8th graders and incoming 6th graders, focused on the high school.
And it was a booklet that, and I sent you copies of the booklet.
How many students we talking about?
I'm sorry.
30 a year, is it roughly, Maria? 30 or 40?
Well, if you look at the budget